The winter wind howled through the broken shutters of what used to be Mary Ellen's home, carrying with it the bitter scent of burnt wood and broken dreams. 3 days had passed since the fire consumed everything she had worked for during her 5 years as a widow. The small farmhouse that her late husband Thomas had built with his own hands was now nothing more than charred beams and ash-covered memories. Mary Ellen pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as she sat on the old wooden crate that served as her only remaining seat. Her 2 children, 8-year-old Sarah and 6-year-old Benjamin, huddled close to her sides. The November cold was creeping through every crack in the makeshift shelter she had cobbled together from salvage boards and torn canvas. It barely kept the wind out, let alone the freezing temperatures that came with the approaching Wyoming winter. "Mama, I'm hungry," Benjamin whispered, his small voice barely audible over the wind. His lips were turning blue despite the thin blanket wrapped around his tiny frame. Sarah said nothing, but Mary Ellen could feel her daughter's stomach rumbling against her side. The last of their food had been consumed that morning, half a loaf of stale bread that a neighbor had given them out of pity. Mary Ellen's pride had been shattered along with everything else in that fire, forcing her to accept charity just to keep her children from starving. But even the kindness of neighbors had its limits. People in their small settlement had their own families to feed, their own struggles to face as winter approached. Mary Ellen closed her eyes and tried to think of options, but every path seemed blocked. The nearest town was Cheyenne, 40 miles away through dangerous territory. She had no money for passage, no relatives to turn to, and winter was closing in fast. The few coins she had managed to save over the years had been hidden in a tin box under the floorboards, now buried somewhere in the ashes of her former life. The sound of approaching horses made her heart race with fear. After dark, riders usually meant trouble. Cattle rustlers, drifters, or worse often traveled these parts when honest folks were sleeping. Mary Ellen pulled her children closer and peered through a gap in the canvas walls. 3 riders were approaching, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hat brims. "Stay quiet," she whispered to Sarah and Benjamin, though her own voice trembled with fear. She had heard stories about what happened to women alone with children when the wrong kind of men came calling. Her hand instinctively moved to the old rifle propped against the wall, Thomas's hunting rifle that had somehow survived the fire. But she knew it held only one bullet, and she was not sure she could bring herself to use it even if she had to. The horses stopped just outside their poor shelter. Mary Ellen could hear the creaking of leather saddles and the soft jingle of spurs as the men dismounted. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure they could hear it through the thin walls. "Ma'am," a deep voice called out from the darkness. "We saw your light and wondered if you might need help." Mary Ellen did not respond immediately. Kind words from strangers often hid cruel intentions. She had learned that lesson the hard way during her years alone on the frontier. Instead, she quietly moved the rifle closer to her reach and waited. "We're not looking for trouble, ma'am," the same voice continued. "Name's Jake Morrison. These are my brothers, Cole and Sam. We were riding through when we spotted your shelter. Looks like you might have had some hard times." Still, Mary Ellen remained silent. Benjamin started to speak, but she quickly placed her hand over his mouth. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, especially not with her children's lives at stake. "Look, ma'am," the voice called again, gentler this time. "I can see smoke from your fire, and I know someone's in there. We got some food and warm blankets if you need them. No strings attached. We'll leave them outside, and be on our way if that's what you prefer." The mention of food made Mary Ellen's empty stomach clench with hunger. She had not eaten anything substantial in 2 days, giving what little food they had to the children. But accepting help from strange men in the middle of nowhere seemed like inviting disaster. "Please, ma'am," another voice chimed in, younger and less gruff than the first. "We lost our own ma when we were young. We know what it's like to be hungry and cold. We're not asking for anything in return." Sarah looked up at her mother with pleading eyes. The little girl had been trying so hard to be brave, but Mary Ellen could see the exhaustion and hunger wearing her down. Benjamin had fallen asleep against her side, his small body shivering despite her attempts to keep him warm. Mary Ellen made a decision that went against every instinct she had developed as a woman alone on the frontier. She picked up the rifle and slowly approached the canvas flap that served as a door. "I have a gun," she called out, trying to make her voice sound stronger than she felt. "And I know how to use it." A low chuckle came from outside. "Yes, ma'am, I expect you do. Most folks out here have to know their way around a firearm to survive. We respect that. What do you want?" she asked directly. "Nothing from you, ma'am. We're heading south for the winter, and we came across your situation. Seems like you've had a fire recently. Lost everything from the looks of it." Mary Ellen's throat tightened. The reality of her situation was evident to anyone who looked. The charred remains of her house were visible even in the darkness, and their pathetic shelter spoke volumes about their desperation. "We have some supplies we can spare," the voice continued. "Food, blankets, maybe some materials to help you build a better shelter. We'll leave them outside, and ride on if you prefer. But it's going to be a hard night, and it looks like it might snow before morning." The wind picked up again, causing their flimsy shelter to shake and flutter. Mary Ellen knew he was right about the coming snow. She could smell it in the air, feel it in the way the temperature was dropping. If snow fell tonight, their inadequate shelter would not protect them from freezing to death. "Why would you help strangers?" she asked, still suspicious, but desperately hoping these men were different from the others she had encountered. "Because someone helped us once when we needed it," came the reply. "And because it's the right thing to do." Mary Ellen stood in the darkness for a long moment, weighing her options. Trust these strangers and possibly put her children in danger, or refuse their help and almost certainly face death from exposure and starvation. Neither choice seemed good, but one offered hope while the other promised only suffering. The sound of her children's labored breathing in the cold made the decision for her. She could not let her pride or fear cost them their lives. "All right," she called out finally, "but you stay outside while I check what you're offering." "Fair enough, ma'am. We'll set the supplies by your door and step back to our horses." Mary Ellen heard the men moving around outside, the soft thud of packages being set down, and then the sound of boots walking away. She waited several minutes before carefully lifting the canvas flap and peering outside. In the pale moonlight, she could see 3 men standing by their horses about 20 feet away. They had indeed left several bundles near a shelter entrance. The men appeared to be keeping their word about maintaining distance, though she could not make out their faces clearly in the darkness. Quickly, she grabbed the nearest bundle and pulled it inside. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped it to find jerked beef, hardtack biscuits, and what felt like a full loaf of fresh bread. Another bundle contained thick wool blankets that smelled clean and warm. A third held canvas and rope that could be used to reinforce their shelter. "There's more," one of the men called softly. "Enough food for several days and materials to build you a proper windbreak." Mary Ellen's eyes filled with tears. After 3 days of desperation, this unexpected kindness felt like a miracle. But years of hard experience had taught her to be cautious of gifts that seemed too good to be true. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "No catch, ma'am. Just neighbors helping neighbors, even if we're all strangers to each other." "I can't pay you back," she admitted, the words coming out harder than she expected. "Not asking you to. Sometimes help flows one direction, and that's okay. Maybe someday you'll be in a position to help someone else who needs it." Mary Ellen pulled all the supplies inside and began distributing the food to her children. Benjamin woke up as soon as he smelled the bread, and both children ate hungrily while she tried to process what was happening. "Ma'am," the voice called again, "we noticed your house burned down recently. Do you have anywhere to go? Family or friends in town, perhaps?" The question hit her like a physical blow. The truth was almost too painful to speak aloud. "No," she said simply. "We have nowhere." A long silence followed her words. She could hear the men talking quietly among themselves. though she could not make out what they were saying. Finally, the first voice spoke again. "Ma'am, we're in a small ranch about 15 miles south of here. It's not much, but we got a bunkhouse that's not being used right now. You and your children are welcome to shelter there for the winter if you need it." Mary Ellen's heart stopped. The offer seemed impossible, too generous to be real. "I don't understand," she said. "You don't even know us. We know enough. We know you're a mother trying to protect her children, and we know you're in trouble through no fault of your own. That's enough. But why would you trust strangers with your property? How do you know we won't steal from you or cause problems?" Another quiet chuckle came from the darkness. "I suppose we don't know for certain, but we're pretty good judges of character, and desperate people aren't usually the ones who turn down help out of pride. Besides, the bunkhouse is just sitting empty, and winter's coming on hard. Seems like a waste to let good shelter go unused when folks need it." Mary Ellen's mind raced. The offer sounded too good to be true, but the alternative was almost certain death for her children. Still, accepting help from strange men meant putting herself and her children at their mercy completely. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course, ma'am. Take all the time you need. We'll be camping about a mile south of here tonight, if you decide you want to take us up on the offer. If not, you keep the supplies with our blessing, and we'll wish you well." Mary Ellen heard them mounting their horses again. Before they rode away, the first voice called out one more time. "Mom, if you do decide to come with us, bring whatever you can carry. We'll make sure you and your children are safe and warm. You have my word on that." Then they were gone, leaving only the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance, and Mary Ellen alone with the most difficult decision of her life. Mary Ellen sat awake for hours after the men left, watching her children sleep peacefully for the first time in days. Their bellies were full of real food, and their small bodies were finally warm under the thick wool blankets the strangers had provided. The bread alone was better than anything they had tasted in weeks, and seeing Benjamin and Sarah eat without the desperate hunger in their eyes had nearly made her weep with relief. But relief was mixed with uncertainty. Everything in her experience warned against trusting strange men who appeared in the night with offers that seemed too generous to be real. During her 5 years as a widow, she had learned that kindness from men often came with expectations that she was not willing to meet. Yet these men had asked for nothing, demanded nothing, and left supplies without even seeing her face clearly. As the night grew colder, Mary Ellen found herself studying every word of their conversation, looking for hidden meanings or threats she might have missed. But no matter how she examined their offer, it seemed genuine. They had spoken with respect, kept their distance, and offered help without conditions. Most importantly, they had mentioned losing their own mother, which explained why they might understand her situation better than most. The wind rattled their poor shelter again, and Mary Ellen realized that snow was indeed beginning to fall. Light flakes were drifting through gaps in the canvas, and the temperature was dropping fast. Their makeshift shelter might not survive a heavy snowfall, and even with the new blankets, they could freeze if the storm lasted long. She looked at her sleeping children and made her decision. Tomorrow morning, she would find these men and accept their offer. It was risky, but staying here was certain death. At least with them, there was a chance for survival. When dawn broke gray and cold, Mary Ellen packed their few belongings quickly. The children woke to find 2 inches of snow on the ground, and more falling steadily. Benjamin's excitement at seeing snow was dampened when he realized how cold their shelter had become during the night. "Mama, are we leaving?" Sarah asked, always perceptive beyond her years. "Yes, sweetheart. Remember those men who brought us food last night? They offered us a warm place to stay for the winter." Sarah's eyes brightened with hope, but Mary Ellen could see the worry there too. Her daughter had learned to be cautious around strangers, just as she had. "Are they good men, Mama?" Benjamin asked, his innocent question cutting straight to the heart of Mary Ellen's fears. "I believe they might be," she said honestly. "But we'll be careful and stay together no matter what." They gathered everything they could carry, which was not much. a few clothes that had been hanging on the line during the fire, Thomas's rifle, and the remaining ammunition, a small Bible that had been in Mary Ellen's coat pocket, and a locket containing a picture of Thomas that she wore around her neck. Everything else was either ash or too heavy to transport. The walk south through the snow was difficult with two small children, but Mary Ellen was determined to reach the men's camp before the storm worsened. She carried Benjamin when he grew tired, while Sarah bravely trudged through snow that sometimes reached her knees. After about an hour of walking, they saw smoke rising from a grove of trees ahead. As they approached, Mary Ellen could smell coffee brewing and bacon frying, scents that made her mouth water despite her nervousness about what they might be walking into. "Hello, the camp," she called out when they were still a distance away, not wanting to surprise armed men. "Come on in, ma'am," came a familiar voice from the night before. "We've been hoping you'd show up." Mary Ellen led her children into the camp and got her first clear look at the men who had offered them sanctuary. Jake Morrison was a tall, lean man in his 30s with kind brown eyes and weathered hands that spoke of years of hard work. His brothers Cole and Sam were younger, probably in their 20s, and bore a strong family resemblance. All three men removed their hats respectfully when they saw her. "Ma'am, I'm glad you decided to trust us," Jake said, his voice warm and sincere. "And these must be your children." Sarah hid behind Mary Ellen's skirt while Benjamin stared at the strangers with wide, curious eyes. The men seemed to understand the children's shyness and kept their distance while still being friendly. "I'm Mary Ellen Harper," she said, deciding that honesty was the best approach. "These are my children, Sarah and Benjamin." "Pleased to meet you all," Jake said. "We've got coffee ready and breakfast cooking if you're hungry." The smell of real food made Mary Ellen's stomach clench with hunger, but she forced herself to remain cautious. "That's very kind, but before we eat, I need to know exactly what you're offering and what you expect in return." Jake nodded approvingly. Smart to ask direct questions. "Here's the truth of it. We run a small ranch about 2 hours' ride from here. Nothing fancy, but it's profitable enough to keep us fed and housed. We got a bunkhouse that was built for hired hands, but we can't afford to pay cowboys right now, so it sits empty." He gestured toward his brothers. "The three of us live in the main house, which has 4 rooms. The bunkhouse has 2 rooms, a small kitchen, and a good stone fireplace. It's warm, dry, and sound. You and your children would have it all to yourselves. What would you expect from us?" Mary Ellen asked, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "Nothing beyond basic courtesy," Jake replied. "Though if you wanted to help with cooking or other household tasks, we wouldn't turn down the assistance. We're not the best cooks in the territory." Cole, the youngest brother, spoke up for the first time. "What Jake's not telling you is that we're terrible cooks. We've been living on beans and hardtack for months because none of US can make a decent meal." Mary Ellen almost smiled at his honesty. "And when winter ends, what happens then?" "That depends," Jake said. "If you want to stay on, you're welcome. If you want to move on, we'll help you get wherever you want to go. No obligations either way." "Why?" Mary Ellen asked the question that had been haunting her all night. Why help complete strangers with no guarantee of anything in return? Jake was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When he looked back at her, his eyes held a sadness that spoke of old pain. "Because 7 years ago, our pod died suddenly, and our ma was left alone with 3 boys to raise," he said quietly. "We were older than your children, but not by much. Ma tried to keep the family together, but that first winter nearly killed us all. We would have died if not for an old rancher named Henry Walsh who took us in." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Henry didn't ask for anything in return, just like we're not asking anything of you. He said that sometimes people need help, and if you're able to give it, you should. He fed us, sheltered us, and taught us everything we know about ranching." Sam, the middle brother, picked up the story. "When we were old enough, Henry helped us start our own place. Said he was just passing on what someone had done for him years earlier. Made us promise to do the same if we ever got the chance. So this isn't really about us being generous," Cole added with a slight grin. We're just keeping a promise we made to a good man who saved our lives." Mary Ellen felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Their story had the ring of truth to it, and it explained their unusual willingness to help strangers. More importantly, they seemed to understand what it meant to be desperate and alone. "If I agree to this," she said slowly, "I need your word that you'll respect me and my children. I won't be anyone's servant, and I won't tolerate any behavior that makes my children uncomfortable." "You have my word," Jake said solemnly. "All our words. And if any one of us does anything to make you feel unsafe or unwelcome, you can leave immediately with whatever supplies you need." Benjamin tugged on Mary Ellen's coat. "Mama, I'm cold," he whispered. The reminder of her children's needs helped Mary Ellen make her final decision. She could continue to let fear and pride guide her choices and risk losing her children to the winter, or she could trust these men who seemed genuinely interested in helping without demanding anything in return. "All right," she said, the words coming out stronger than she felt. "We accept your offer." Jake's face broke into a genuine smile. "I'm glad. Now how about some breakfast before we head to the ranch?" As they sat around the fire, eating the best meal they had enjoyed in weeks, Mary Ellen began to allow herself a small measure of hope. The men treated her children with gentle kindness, offering Benjamin second helpings and making sure Sarah had the warmest spot by the fire. They spoke to her as an equal, asking about her background and sharing stories about their ranch without prying into painful subjects like how she had ended up alone. When breakfast was finished, the men quickly broke camp with the efficiency of people who had spent years living outdoors. They saddled their horses and prepared a gentle mare for Mary Ellen to ride, while the children rode double with Cole, who seemed to have a natural way with young ones. "The ranch isn't much to look at from the outside," Jake warned as they prepared to leave. "But it's solid and warm. We built most of it ourselves over the past few years." As they rode south through the snowy landscape, Mary Ellen found herself cautiously optimistic for the first time since the fire. The men continued to treat her and the children with respect, and their easy conversation helped pass the cold miles. Benjamin was delighted to be riding a real horse, while Sarah remained quietly observant, but seemed less frightened than she had been the night before. The ranch, when it finally came into view, was indeed modest but well-maintained. The main house was a simple log structure with a stone chimney from which smoke was rising warmly. The bunkhouse stood about 50 yards away, smaller but built with the same solid craftsmanship. A barn, chicken coop, and several corrals completed the picture of a working ranch that was clearly cared for by its owners. "It's not fancy," Sam said apologetically as they dismounted, "but everything works the way it should." Mary Ellen looked around at the neat, functional buildings and felt something she had not experienced in months, a sense of safety. This place felt like a home, not just a shelter. The men had built something good here, something that spoke of their character more clearly than any words could. "It looks wonderful," she said, and meant it completely. Jake led Mary Ellen and her children to the bunkhouse while his brothers took care of the horses. The building was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with 2 good-sized rooms, a small but functional kitchen area, and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. The floors were solid wood, well-fitted and clean, and the windows had real glass panes with sturdy shutters. "We built this 2 years ago when we thought we might be able to hire some hands," Jake explained as he showed them around. "Never ended up needing the extra help, so it's been sitting empty except when we have visitors passing through." The main room contained a table with 4 chairs, a comfortable-looking sofa that appeared to be handmade, and several shelves built into the walls. The bedroom held 2 beds with thick mattresses and warm quilts, along with a chest of drawers and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. Everything was simple but well-made and spotlessly clean. "There's firewood stacked outside," Jay continued, "and we'll make sure you always have plenty. The kitchen has basic supplies, and you're welcome to share meals with us at the main house or cook for yourselves, whatever you prefer." Mary Ellen ran her hand along the smooth surface of the table, hardly believing that such comfortable accommodations were being offered to them freely. Benjamin was already exploring the bedroom, delighted with the prospect of sleeping in a real bed, while Sarah stood close to her mother, taking in every detail with her usual careful observation. "This is far too generous," Mary Ellen said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how we'll ever be able to repay such kindness." Jake waved off her concern. "Like I told you, we're not looking for repayment. Just having the place occupied and cared for is payment enough. These buildings do better with people living in them than sitting empty." Cole appeared in the doorway, carrying an armload of split wood, which he began stacking neatly beside the fireplace. "We'll get a fire going to warm the place up," he said cheerfully. "Gets cold fast when a building's been empty." As the three men worked to make the bunkhouse comfortable for its new occupants, Mary Ellen watched them carefully for any sign of the expectation she had learned to expect from men who offered help to women alone. But they seemed genuinely focused on nothing more than making sure she and her children were warm and safe. Sam returned from the main house, carrying a large basket filled with supplies. "Food basics," he explained, setting it on the kitchen table. "Flour, salt, sugar, coffee, dried beans, some preserved meat. Should be enough to get you started." "We also brought these," Cole added, producing several books from under his arm. Figured the children might like something to read during the long winter evenings. Sarah's eyes lit up at the sight of the books, though she was still too shy to speak up. Benjamin had no such restraint. "Are there pictures?" he asked eagerly, abandoning his exploration of the bedroom to examine the offered treasures. "Some of them do," Sam said with a smile. "And there are some arithmetic books, too, if you want to keep up with your schooling." Mary Ellen felt tears threatening again. These men had thought of everything, even her children's education. It had been weeks since Sarah and Benjamin had been able to attend the small school in their settlement, and she had worried about them falling behind in their learning. "You men have been incredibly thoughtful," she managed to say. "I don't know what we did to deserve such kindness from strangers." "You didn't have to do anything to deserve it," Jake said matter-of-factly. "Sometimes life knocks people down through no fault of their own. When that happens, it's the duty of folks who are on their feet to lend a hand." Once the fire was crackling warmly in the fireplace, and the basic supplies were arranged in the kitchen, the three men prepared to leave Mary Ellen and her children to settle in. Jake paused at the door with one final instruction. "We generally eat supper around 6 o'clock at the main house. You're welcome to join us, or we can bring something over here if you prefer. Whatever makes you and the children most comfortable." "We'll come to the main house," Mary Ellen decided. "It's the least I can do after all your kindness." After the men left, Mary Ellen allowed herself to truly absorb their new situation. For the first time since the fire, they had real shelter, adequate food, and safety. The children were already making themselves at home, with Benjamin bouncing on one of the beds and Sarah carefully examining the books that had been left for them. "Mama, is this really ours?" Sarah asked, her voice full of wonder. "For now, sweetheart. These kind men are letting us stay here for the winter." "And then what happens?" Sarah's question showed the wisdom of a child who had learned that good things rarely lasted. Mary Ellen sat down beside her daughter and pulled her close. "I don't know yet, but for the first time in weeks, we don't have to worry about tonight or tomorrow. That's enough for now." As the afternoon passed, Mary Ellen explored their new home more thoroughly and began to understand the level of care that had gone into its construction. Everything was built to last, with attention paid to details that would make daily life easier. The kitchen had a good supply of pots and dishes, the fireplace drew well and provided excellent heat, and the beds were comfortable enough for people who had been sleeping on the ground. When evening approached, Mary Ellen made sure the children were clean and presentable before walking to the main house. She had no idea what to expect from sharing a meal with three bachelor brothers, but their continued kindness gave her reason to hope it would be a pleasant experience. Jake opened the door before they could knock, as if he had been watching for them. Come in," he said warmly. Hope you found everything you needed in the bunkhouse. The main house was similar to the bunkhouse in its simple functionality, but larger and obviously designed for permanent occupancy. The kitchen was spacious and well-equipped, and the main room had a long table that could easily seat 8 people. Everything was clean, but had the slightly disorganized look of a home where men lived without feminine influence. "We managed to put together a decent stew," Cole announced proudly, ladling food into bowls. Sam even made biscuits that aren't burnt. The meal was simple but delicious, and Mary Ellen found herself enjoying the easy conversation around the table. The men asked the children gentle questions about their interests and told amusing stories about ranch life that made Benjamin giggle and brought shy smiles to Sarah's face. "Tomorrow, if the weather clears, we could show you around the place," Jake suggested. "Maybe you'd like to see the horses and the chickens. We've got a milk cow, too, if you're interested in fresh milk." "I'd like that very much," Mary Ellen replied. "I grew up on a farm, so I'm comfortable around animals." "That's helpful," Sam said. "We could use someone who knows about keeping chickens productive in winter. Ours seem to think laying eggs is optional once the weather turns cold." Mary Ellen laughed, the first genuine laugh she had enjoyed since before the fire. "I might be able to help with that. My mother had some tricks for keeping hens laying through the winter." As the evening progressed, Mary Ellen began to relax in a way she had not experienced in months. The men treated her as an equal, valued her knowledge and experience, and showed genuine interest in her children's well-being. There were no uncomfortable looks, no inappropriate comments, and no sense that they expected anything beyond pleasant companionship in return for their hospitality. When it was time to return to the bunkhouse, Jake walked them back across the yard to make sure they had everything they needed for the night. "Sleep well," he said at their door. "Tomorrow we'll start showing you how everything works around here." "And Mary Ellen?" She turned back to look at him. "Yes. Thank you for trusting us. I know it wasn't an easy decision, and we don't take that trust lightly." As Mary Ellen tucked her children into warm, comfortable beds for the first time in weeks, she reflected on the incredible turn their lives had taken. 24 hours ago, they had been facing almost certain death from cold and starvation. Tonight, they were warm, fed, and safe in the care of men who seemed genuinely committed to helping them without expecting anything in return. Benjamin fell asleep immediately, exhausted from the excitement of the day and the novelty of sleeping in a real bed. Sarah stayed awake a bit longer, processing the dramatic change in their circumstances. "Mama, do you think the men are really as nice as they seem?" she asked quietly. Mary Ellen considered her daughter's question carefully. Sarah had learned to be wary of adults, especially men, and her caution was well-founded based on their experiences since Thomas's death. "I think they might be sweetheart, but we'll continue to be careful and see how things go. Sometimes there really are good people in the world who help others just because it's the right thing to do." "I hope they're good," Sarah whispered. "I like having a warm bed again." "So do I, baby. So do I." As Mary Ellen lay down in her own comfortable bed, listening to the wind howling outside their warm, secure shelter, she allowed herself to feel something she had not dared to experience in months: hope for the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new decisions, but tonight they were safe. For the first time since the fire, Mary Ellen fell asleep without fear, surrounded by the blessed silence of true shelter and the knowledge that her children were warm and protected. The nightmare of the past weeks was finally over, replaced by the possibility of something better than she had dared to imagine. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside their new home, Mary Ellen and her children slept peacefully, wrapped in the unexpected gift of human kindness and the promise of a future that might hold more than mere survival. Mary Ellen woke to the sound of Benjamin's excited voice outside their window. The morning sun was streaming through the glass panes, creating patterns of light across the wooden floor that spoke of clear skies after the previous night's snowfall. She had slept better than she had in months, her body finally able to relax in the knowledge that her children were truly safe and warm. "Mama, come see." Benjamin called from outside. "There are chickens everywhere." Mary Ellen dressed quickly and stepped outside to find her son standing in fascination before a large chicken coop where dozens of hens were scratching in the snow-covered yard. Sarah stood nearby, more reserved but equally interested in the bustling activity of the ranch coming to life. Jake approached from the direction of the barn, carrying 2 buckets of what appeared to be fresh milk. His face broke into a smile when he saw the family enjoying their first morning at the ranch. "Morning, folks. Sleep well?" he asked, setting down the buckets to tip his hat politely. "Better than we have in weeks," Mary Ellen replied honestly. "Thank you again for everything." "No need for thanks. How about some breakfast?" "Cole's making his famous flapjacks, and we've got fresh eggs courtesy of those ladies there." He gestured toward the chickens, which were indeed producing a steady stream of eggs as Sam collected them in a large basket. Over breakfast in the main house, Mary Ellen began to understand the rhythm of life on the Morrison Ranch. The men rose early to tend the animals, check on the cattle that were scattered across the range, and handle the dozens of small tasks that kept a ranch running smoothly. It was hard work, but they approached it with a camaraderie and good humor that spoke of men who enjoyed what they did for a living. "Would you like that tour we mentioned yesterday?" Jake asked as they finished eating. The children might enjoy seeing the horses up close. The tour revealed a well-organized operation that was modest in size, but efficient in design. The Morrison brothers had clearly put considerable thought into every aspect of their ranch, from the layout of the buildings to the breeding of their cattle. They ran about 200 head of beef cattle on grazing land that stretched for miles in every direction, supplemented by a small dairy operation and enough chickens to provide egg for both household use and occasional sale in town. Benjamin was enchanted by everything he saw, asking endless questions about the horses, the cattle, and the various pieces of equipment used to manage the ranch. Sarah was more reserved, but equally observant, taking in every detail with the careful attention she brought to everything new in her life. "This horse is Buttercup," Cole said, introducing the children to a gentle mare with a golden coat. "She's getting on in years, but she's still the best cow pony on the place. Want to pet her nose?" Both children were delighted to interact with the friendly horse, and Mary Ellen watched them with a joy she had not felt since before Thomas's death. To see her children laughing and playing again was worth any risk she had taken in trusting these strangers. "You mentioned knowing about chickens," Sam said as they walked past the coop. "Ours have been laying poorly lately. Any thoughts on what might help?" Mary Ellen examined the setup with the practiced eye of someone who had raised chickens for years. "They need more protection from drafts," she said after a moment. "And their roosts are too low. Chickens like to sleep high up where they feel safe from predators. If you raise those roosts and add some burlap to block the worst of the wind, you'll probably see improvement in both laying and general health." "Think you could show us how to fix it?" Jake asked. "We'd be grateful for the help." "Of course. I'd be happy to contribute something useful after all you've done for us." As the days passed, Mary Ellen found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. She had grown up on a farm and understood the demands of caring for animals and maintaining buildings, so she was able to help with tasks that the men had been struggling to manage on their own. Her suggestions for improving the chicken coop proved effective almost immediately. Within a week, egg production had increased noticeably, and the hens appeared healthier and more active despite the cold weather. The men were impressed with her knowledge and began asking for her advice on other aspects of ranch management. "Never thought about adding apple cider vinegar to the chicken's water," Cole admitted as they worked together to repair a section of fence. "But it's made a real difference in how they're acting." "My mother swore by it," Mary Ellen replied, holding a fence post steady while Cole secured it with wire. "Said it kept them from getting sick and helped them lay better eggs." More importantly, Mary Ellen began to see that the men's kindness was not a temporary facade designed to gain her trust. Day after day, they treated her and her children with consistent respect and consideration. They included the children in activities appropriate for their ages, listened to Mary Ellen's suggestions about improving the ranch, and never made her feel like a burden or an object of charity. Benjamin thrived in the ranch environment, following the men around like an eager puppy and absorbing everything they taught him about caring for animals and maintaining equipment. His natural curiosity and willingness to help made him a favorite with all three brothers. Sarah remained more cautious, but even she began to relax as the weeks passed without incident. She particularly enjoyed helping Mary Ellen in the kitchen, where they worked together to prepare meals that were far better than anything the men had been managing on their own. "I haven't eaten this well since our mother was alive," Sam confessed one evening after a dinner of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and apple pie made with preserves from their own fruit trees. "You're spoiling us, Mary Ellen." "It's the least I can do," she replied, though she was beginning to realize that her contributions to the household were valued as much as the shelter and food they provided to her family. As winter deepened, Mary Ellen found herself facing an unexpected dilemma. The longer she stayed at the ranch, the more she realized how much she was enjoying the life they were building there. The work was satisfying, the men were good company, and her children were happier than they had been since their father's death. But she also knew that accepting charity indefinitely was not sustainable, either practically or emotionally. She needed to find a way to contribute more substantially to the household or make plans to move on when spring arrived. The thought of leaving filled her with unexpected sadness, but she refused to become a permanent burden on people who had already given them so much. The solution came from an unexpected source. Jake approached her one evening as she was reading to the children by the fireplace in the bunkhouse. "Mary Ellen, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" She joined him outside, where the winter air was crisp and clear under a sky full of stars. "I hope you don't mind me bringing this up," he began, clearly choosing his words carefully, "but we've been talking about your situation, and we have a proposition for you." Mary Ellen's heart sank. She had been dreading this conversation, expecting that the men would eventually want something in return for their hospitality. "What kind of proposition?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "A business arrangement," Jake said quickly, apparently sensing her apprehension. "We've all noticed how much you've improved things around here. The chickens are laying better, the meals are 100 times better than anything we were managing, and you've spotted several problems with our setup that we never would have caught ourselves." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "What we're thinking is this. Instead of you feeling like you're accepting charity, what if we made you a partner in the ranch? You'd own a share of the operation, help make decisions about how it's run, and receive a portion of the profits. In return, you continue doing what you're already doing, managing the household, helping with the animals, and contributing your knowledge about farming." Mary Ellen stared at him in shock. "A partner? But I don't have any money to invest." "You don't need money. You've already invested your knowledge and your work. That's worth more than cash to us right now. But that's incredibly generous. Why would you offer such a thing to someone you barely know?" Jake smiled. "We've been watching you for weeks now. We know you're honest, hardworking, and smart. You care about doing things right, and you're not afraid of hard work. Those are the qualities we want in a partner." Mary Ellen felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Partnership in a working ranch would provide security for her children that she had never dared to hope for. But it also represented a level of trust and acceptance that seemed almost too good to be true. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need." "But Mary Ellen—" "Yes. We're not making this offer because we feel sorry for you. We're making it because you've proven yourself to be exactly the kind of person we want to build something with. This ranch is better with you here than it was without you." As Mary Ellen lay in bed that night, she found herself imagining a future that she had never dared to consider. A partnership in the ranch would mean stability for her children, meaningful work for herself, and the chance to be part of something larger than mere survival. But it also meant trusting these men with more than just her immediate safety. It meant believing that they saw her as more than an object of charity, that they valued her contributions enough to offer her a permanent place in their lives. For the first time since Thomas's death, Mary Ellen began to believe that she might be able to build something new and good from the ashes of her old life. The future, which had seemed so bleak just weeks before, was beginning to look bright with possibility. Mary Ellen spent 3 days considering Jake's offer, weighing every aspect of what partnership would mean for her and her children. During those days, she watched the Morrison brothers even more carefully than before, looking for any sign that their proposal was motivated by something other than genuine respect for her abilities and contributions. What she saw convinced her that their offer was sincere. Jake, Cole, and Sam continued to treat her as they always had, with respect, kindness, and appreciation for her work. They made no demands, applied no pressure, and seemed genuinely willing to wait for her decision regardless of how long it took. The children, unaware of the momentous decision their mother was contemplating, continued to flourish in their new environment. Benjamin had become particularly attached to Cole, who seemed to enjoy teaching the boy about ranch work and horses. Sarah, still cautious but increasingly confident, had begun helping Sam with the bookkeeping that tracked the ranch's income and expenses. On the 4th morning, Mary Ellen made her decision. She found Jake in the barn, working on repairing a harness that had broken the previous day. He looked up when she entered, and she could see both hope and apprehension in his eyes. "I accept your offer," she said simply. Jake's face broke into a wide smile. "I'm glad, really glad. I think this is going to work out well for all of us. But I have some conditions," Mary Ellen continued, holding up her hand to forestall his celebration. "Of course. What do you need?" "First, I want this arrangement documented in writing. Not because I don't trust your word, but because business partnerships should be formal and clear to protect everyone involved." Jake nodded approvingly. "Absolutely. We'll ride into town next week and have the lawyer draw up proper papers. Second, I want to understand exactly what my responsibilities will be and what authority I'll have in making decisions about the ranch." "Fair enough. We'll work all that out in detail." And third, Mary Ellen paused, gathering courage for the most important condition. "I want to be sure that my children will always be welcome here and that they'll have the opportunity to inherit a portion of whatever we build together if something happens to me." "Mary Ellen, your children are already part of this family as far as we're concerned. Of course they'll be provided for." The formal partnership agreement, drawn up by the town lawyer the following week, was more generous than Mary Ellen had dared to hope. She would own a 25% share of the ranch and all its assets, with her responsibilities clearly defined as managing the household, overseeing the poultry operation, and contributing her agricultural knowledge to improve overall ranch productivity. More importantly, the agreement included provisions for her children's education and future security, ensuring that they would inherit her share of the ranch if anything happened to her, and that they would have the opportunity to become full partners themselves when they came of age. As winter gave way to spring, Mary Ellen threw herself into her new role with enthusiasm and determination. She expanded the chicken operation, started a vegetable garden that would provide fresh food for the household, and began implementing improvements to the ranch's efficiency that saved both time and money. The men proved to be excellent partners, valuing her input on major decisions and supporting her initiatives even when they required initial investment. Her suggestion to add sheep to their livestock mix, for example, was met with skepticism initially, but proved profitable when the wool sales provided additional income during a slow period in cattle prices. Benjamin continued to thrive in the ranch environment, becoming increasingly skilled at handling horses and cattle under Cole's patient instruction. By his 9th birthday, he could ride as well as most adults and had developed an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that impressed everyone who saw him work. Sarah, now 10, had discovered a talent for numbers and bookkeeping that made her invaluable to the ranch's financial management. Sam, who had been struggling to keep accurate records of expenses and income, was delighted to have someone who actually enjoyed working with figures and had a natural aptitude for organizing information. As the seasons passed, Mary Ellen realized that the Morrison Ranch had become more than just a refuge or a business opportunity. It had become home in the truest sense, a place where she and her children belonged and were valued for who they were rather than pitted for what they had lost. The partnership prospered beyond anyone's expectations. Mary Ellen's contributions to ranch efficiency, combined with the men's hard work and the favorable weather, resulted in their most profitable year ever. More cattle, improved breeding stock, expanded poultry operations, and diversified income sources had transformed a modest ranch into a genuinely successful enterprise. But the success was measured in more than just financial terms. The ranch had become a place where 4 adults and 2 children had formed something resembling a family, bound together not by blood but by mutual respect, shared goals, and genuine affection. 2 years after that desperate night, when Mary Ellen had faced the prospect of death for herself and her children, she stood on the porch of the main house watching Benjamin help Cole break a young horse while Sarah worked with Sam to plan the next year's budget. Jake was repairing fence in the distance, whistling a tune that carried clearly in the still air. The transformation seemed almost impossible to believe. From a desperate widow with no options and 2 starving children, she had become a successful rancher, a valued partner, and a woman with a secure future for herself and her family. But perhaps more importantly, she had learned that sometimes the worst disasters in life can lead to the best opportunities if you have the courage to accept help when it's offered and the wisdom to recognize genuine kindness when you encounter it. The letter that arrived that morning had brought news that would have seemed impossible during those dark weeks after the fire. Her former neighbor, writing from their old settlement, reported that the man responsible for the fire that had destroyed her house had been caught in another act of arson and confessed to several previous crimes, including the burning of the Harper farm. The confession cleared Mary Ellen of any suspicion that the fire had been caused by her own negligence. But, more importantly, it confirmed what she had always believed, that the disaster that had nearly destroyed her family had been the result of pure malice, not divine judgment or personal failure. Yet as she folded the letter and put it away, Mary Ellen realized that she felt no anger toward the man who had caused them so much suffering. His actions had indeed destroyed her old life, but they had also led her to a new life that was better than anything she could have imagined. Standing there in the doorway of a home that truly belonged to her, watching children who were healthy and happy, and contemplating a future that held promise instead of fear, Mary Ellen understood that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the greatest disasters. The Dust Trail Cowboys who had stepped in during her darkest hour had not just saved her life. They had helped her discover that she was capable of far more than she had ever believed possible. They had seen potential in her when she had seen only failure, offered partnership when she had expected only charity, and provided a foundation for building something permanent when she had thought her life was over. As the sun set over the Wyoming landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Mary Ellen Harper, now Mary Ellen Harper, rancher and partner, looked toward the future with confidence and gratitude. Her children would grow up with opportunities she had never dreamed possible, in a place where they were valued and loved by people who had chosen to be their family. The thankful night that had seemed so dark and hopeless had indeed led to refuge, but not in the way she had ever imagined. Sometimes salvation comes not from finding shelter from the storm, but from discovering that you have the strength to build something new and beautiful in its aftermath. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, you find that the strangers who help you in your darkest hour turn out to be the family you never knew you were looking for.